गोविंद गोपीनाथ मरण मोहन जू की जाय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाय रशतर शतशिमर भक्ति वेदांत नारायण गोसाई महाराज श्रील गुरुदेव की जाय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाय रशतर शतशिमर श्रील भक्ति वेदांत वामन गोसाई महाराज की जाय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाय रशतर शतशिमर भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जाय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद रशतर शतशिमर भक्ति प्रज्ञान केशव गोसाई महाराज की जाय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद रशतर शतशिमर भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोसाई प्रभुपाद की जाय। नित्य प्रविष्टम विष्णुपाद नित्य प्रविष्ट महाभागवत श्रील गोकिशोर बाबाजी महाराज की जाय। नित्य प्रविष्ट श्री सच्चिदानंद भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की जाय। नित्य प्रविष्ट वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबाजी महाराज की जाय। श्री रूपानुगौरिया गुरु वर्ग की जाय। श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल भद्रदास रघुनाथ शारद गोसाई प्रभु की जाय। श्री स्वरूप दामोदर राय रामानंदारी श्री गौर पार्षद वृंद की जाय। नाम चय श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जाय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरी गौर भक्त वृंद की जाय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल व्रज मंडल मथुर वृंदावन धाम की जाय। सर्व अभिष्ट विदात गिरिराज महाराज की जाय। श्री राधा कुंद श्याम कुंद की जाय। श्री यमुना देवी गंग देवी की जाय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जाय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जाय। श्री पूर्णमासी योग माया की जाय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जाय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जाय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जाय। श्री निताय गो श्री ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जाय। श्री उद्धव गीता की जाय। श्रील विश्वनाथ चक्रवर्ती ठाकुर Sārārtha-darśinī वृत्ति की जाय। श्रील भक्तिसिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी प्रभुपाद गौड़ीय भाष्य की जाय। श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। ओम ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो ओं विष्णुपदाय राधिकाय प्रियात्मने श्री श्रीमद्भक्ति वेदांत नारायणेति नामिने। नमो ओं विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्ति वेदांत स्वामिनेति नामिने। वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नाम्ने गौरत्विषे नमः। गुरवे गौरचन्द्राय राधिकायै तदालये कृष्णाय कृष्णभक्ताय तरभक्ताय नमो नमः। यं प्रव्रजन्तमनुपेतमपेतकृत्यं द्वैपायनो विरहकातर आजुहाव पुत्रेति तन्मयतया तरवोऽभिनेदुस्तं सर्वभूत हृदयं मुनिमानतोऽस्मि। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। शृण्वतं स्वकथा कृष्ण पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तन हृदन्तस्थो ह्यभद्राणि विधुनोति सुहृत्सतं। नष्टप्रयेष्वभद्रेषु नित्यं भगवतसेवया भगवत्युत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। तवैवास्मि न जीवामि त्वया विना इति विज्ञाय राधे त्वां नायमां शरणान्तिकं। भक्त्या विहीना अपराधलक्षाय क्षिप्ताष्टकामादितरङ्गमध्ये कृपामयि त्वां शरणं प्रपन्ना वृन्दे नमस्ते चरणारविन्दम्। Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everybody. Ganga Mataji, Gargrajji, Dandavat Pranam, Sudevi Didi, Rup Manjari, and Nitai, Haribol, and Raseshwari Mataji, Haribol. Dandavat Pranams, everybody. All right, so let's see. Let's read the previous few chapters. Let's start from here. One who desires the highest goal in life should use one's intelligence to keep oneself safe on the spiritual platform, even in difficult situations like being neglected, insulted, ridiculed, envied, or agitated by ignorant people. Krishna then described the story of the tolerant Avanti Brahman who soberly met with the insults of people. Considering all insults to be the results of his own past deeds, he took shelter of the Lord. In the maturity of his realization, he sang a song called the Bhaktisiddhānta, which inspires detachment and devotion. The bodily conception can also be transcended by understanding how the three modes affect a soul. The jiva soul attains a particular nature by the association of modes that combine with each other to produce various effects. All of these changes ultimately arise from the mind. First, by increasing the mode of goodness and devotion, one defeats passion and ignorance. Then, upon attaining pure love for Krishna, the mode of goodness is subverted, and one is placed in transcendence. Once free from the material modes, one gives up his subtle body, his mind, intelligence, and false ego, and he attains the direct association of the Supreme Lord and achieves absolute fulfillment. Krishna then described how in devotional service, one should avoid bad association of sense gratifiers, and especially undue attachment to the opposite sex. Otherwise, one sinks into the deep pit of ignorance. Emperor Pururava was so attached to a heavenly damsel called Urvashi, but later he realized the ill effects of such unfavorable association and took shelter of Krishna. In his detached mood, he sang a song called the Uddhava-gīta. His message is how one can be saved from the inauspicious sex attraction by associating with saintly devotees. The devotees awaken one's spiritual intelligence by constant discussion about the Lord, service to devotees, and the Guru. At the request of Uddhava, Krishna then explains the significance of worshipping the deity form of the Lord. Krishna, while describing all the rules, regulations, recommendations, and practices of deity worship, explains how such deity worship could automatically bring purity and satisfaction to the mind and detach one from sense gratification. And now we come to the second to the last chapter, called Jñāna-yoga. Uddhava will ask Krishna, the soul is spiritual and transcendental to material coverings, and the body is dull, unconscious matter. Thus, to whom does this experience of material existence actually pertain? So we'll hear Krishna's. Let's see. Okay. Let me just open this up. Oh God, I already had it opened up. Sorry, I always do that. Okay, we finished this yesterday, didn't we? Yes. Now we're in chapter 22, Jñāna-yoga. Chapter summary, Kathasar by Pretty sure it's Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami Maharaj who wrote all these kathasars. This chapter gives a summary of Jnana-yoga, which had been elaborately described in the previous chapters. Okay, so now we're getting a summary of all this Jnana-yoga that's been elaborately described in the previous chapters. Everything within the cosmic manifestation is a product of the three modes of material nature. Although such products are perceived by the material senses, they are illusory by nature. Similarly, the conditioned soul's conceptions of good and bad that are given to such products and activities within the universe are illusory. It is better to avoid condemning or praising anyone, because this confines one to the bodily concept of life, and thus negates superior spiritual understanding. The spirit souls pervade the entire universe, and their nature is transcendental to mundane duality. By cultivating such an understanding, one can remain detached even while in the material existence. As long as the conditioned soul desires the gratification of his material senses, the bodily conception of life will continue. Although material existence is illusory, like a dream, those attached to fruit of action remain entangled in the cycle of repeated birth and death. All conditions of material existence, such as birth, death, happiness, and distress, are experienced by the false ego, and not the eternal soul. By distinguishing between matter and spirit, one can gradually renounce the false sense of bodily identification. While the material manifestation goes through stages of creation, maintenance, and annihilation, the changeless absolute truth remains undisturbed. While manifested, the universe rests in the absolute truth, which is all-pervading in time and space. The absolute truth is not transformed, but this cosmic manifestation is made possible by a transformation of the mode of passion. By the mercy of a bona fide spiritual master, one can understand the illusory nature of the material body and thus distinguish the absolute truth from such temporary existence. When a person renounces all desires for sense enjoyment, he can become satisfied in the self alone. Just as the sun is undisturbed by the movement of clouds in the atmosphere, the liberated soul is unaffected by the activities of the material body. Still, when one is a neophyte in the practice of the devotional service of the Lord, one should carefully restrict his contact with the objects of the senses. Until one's determination becomes fixed, one may fall down as a result of obstacles placed before him on the path of spiritual advancement. Still, there is no loss for one engaged in devotional service, because in his next life, he will be given a chance to continue his spiritual practice from where he left off. When one is actually liberated from material existence, he will never desire to indulge in insignificant material sense pleasures, knowing that his eternal self is distinct from the illusory material body. While one is on the path of spiritual realization, if one suffers from disease or other disturbance, he should not neglect to take proper remedial measures. The best means for lust and the other enemies of the mind is meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, especially by the performance of congregational chanting of the Lord's holy names. The false ego can best be conquered by rendering selfless service to the pure devotees of the Lord. By the practice of yoga, materialistic men hope to keep their body fit for sense gratification, up to the limit of the attainment of mystic powers and extended duration of life. These achievements have no lasting value, however, because they are in relation to the material body, which is temporary. The devotees of the Lord are therefore uninterested in attaining the mystic perfections of yoga. Instead, they are keen to take shelter at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, knowing this to be the cause of the eternal cessation of material miseries and engagement in every blissful devotional service. Just checking the comments again. Haribo, Champak Didi and Madhavi Didi, Dandavat Pranam. Text 1. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Parasvabhava Karmani na prashangsen na garhayet Vishvam ekamakam pashyan prakritya purushena cha. The Supreme Lord said, one should neither praise nor criticize the nature and activities of others. Rather, one should understand the material worlds to be working as a combination of material nature and the conditioned souls. One should understand the material worlds to be working as a combination of material nature and the conditioned souls, and resting in the absolute truth. This is an important instruction. This is a famous verse also. Parasvabhava karmani na prashangsen na garhayet. I want to memorize that. Parasvabhava karmani na prashangsen na garhayet. One should neither praise nor criticize the nature and activities of others. Sārārtha-darśinī commentary by Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura. After describing different philosophical systems, Lord Sri Krishna now discusses the philosophy of impersonalism, which preaches that the material creation is false. What is this material creation? Is it factual or is it false? Does it exist or is it merely an illusion? The answer to all these questions will be given in this chapter. Impersonal philosophers are divided into two categories, Vivartavad and Parinamavad. The Supreme Lord is both the cause and effect of this universe. If the theory that the absolute truth transforms to become the material universe, if this conception is accepted, Parinamavad, then it would appear that the Supreme Lord is changeable. On the other hand, those who propagate the philosophy of Vivartavad say that the absolute truth is unchangeable, and that this material world is false. According to another opinion, since the material nature is the energy of the absolute truth, even if it is accepted that the material energy is subject to transformation, the absolute truth, being transcendental to material nature, remains unchanged. There is no objection if the followers of Parinamvad accept this opinion, that there is transformation of the material energies, but not of the Lord. Indeed, this is what has been described by the Supreme Lord, who says that he is the ingredient cause of this universe, that he is the supersoul and time. Although there is certainly a distinction between the energetic and the energy, the Supreme Lord, despite manifesting innumerable forms, remains one without a second. Of the two categories of impersonalists, the Supreme Lord approves the second category. In this chapter, the Lord describes this understanding of Vivartavad and Parinamavad. So there's Vivartavad in the absolute truth and Parinamavad in the material creation, right? The word asat is used by the followers of Vivartavad to mean illusion. But it is used by the followers of Parinamavad to mean temporary existence. The Vivartavadis say that all activities are false, whereas the Parinamavadis say that they are temporary. This is a subtle difference between the two groups of impersonalists. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya commentary by Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Gosvāmī Prabhupāda. Haribo, Prajamna Prabhu and Mantaramurti Mataji. In material existence, we create distinctions between one another due to bodily designations, sometimes praising and sometimes showing disdain. Those who are trying to situate themselves on a transcendental platform, however, should not indulge in such praises and criticisms, knowing that the distinctions between the conditioned souls are simply a creation of the interaction of the three modes of material nature. Those who are impersonalists try to nullify the distinction between the seer, the seen, and the act of seeing, considering the absolute truth to be without variegatedness. In this material world, all varieties are manifestations of the interactions of the three modes of material nature. But in the transcendental abode of the Lord, Vaikuntha, there is no existence of the modes of nature. There, the Lord's spiritual energies have manifested a world of spiritual variegatedness. Because of the competition of the three modes of material nature, the polluted distinctions between superiority and inferiority predominate. Therefore, the material atmosphere is permeated with praise and condemnation. But in the transcendental abode of Vaikuntha, where there is no influence of the material energy, there are no such distinctions. Parasabhava karmani ya prasangsati nindati sa ashubhrashyate svartar asyatya bhiniveshata. One who indulges in praising or criticizing others' natures and activities, that person will deviate from his own best interests because of his absorption on the platform of duality. Sārārtha-darśinī. One who glorifies or criticizes others' natures and activities remains absorbed on the temporary material platform and thus becomes forgetful of the eternal spiritual reality. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. One who becomes habituated to finding fault with others instead of chanting the glories of Lord Hari and the association of devotees will surely exhibit great pride in himself while belittling others. The act of praising and criticizing others falls within the jurisdiction of the interaction of the three modes of material nature. The conditioned souls, being absorbed in duality, have brought about their condition of inauspiciousness. When one pursues his actual self-interest, which is to elevate one to the spiritual platform, he avoids thinking of others in terms of material designations, and thus refrains from criticizing or praising others. The activities of this material world are temporary, full of ignorance, and produce misery, and can never be considered constitutional in nature. As long as one maintains the habit of criticizing or praising others in the bodily conception of life, he will never be elevated to the spiritual platform, having deviated from his real self-interest. Taijase nidrayapane pindasto nashcha chetana mayam prapnoti mrityung va tadvan nanartadrik puman. Just as one loses external consciousness when his senses, which are born of the rajasic ahankar, are overcome by the illusion of dreaming, or death-like state of deep sleep, so a person absorbed in material duality must experience illusion and death. Sārārtha-darśinī. One who thinks in terms of material duality and thus glorifies or condemns others' natures and activities is deviated from his real self-interest. This verse provides an example to illustrate this point. The senses are produced from false ego in the mode of passion. When the senses are dormant as the living entity sleeps, his mind is plunged into the illusion of dreaming. And when the mind becomes inactive, the living entity loses all external consciousness. The living entity loses all external consciousness and remains in a death-like state of deep sleep. Similarly, one who discriminates according to material designations covers his original consciousness, becoming almost like inert matter. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Being enthusiastically engaged on the bodily platform, the conditioned souls remain indifferent to the service of the Lord as they continue dreaming of themselves as lords of the material nature. Such material absorption is the result of forgetting one's constitutional position as the eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Although materialistic sense enjoyers endeavor for achieving high positions within this world, they ultimately meet with destruction under the control of the laws of nature. Being bewildered by false ego, Although the conditioned souls are struggling hard for existence while failing to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they become very proud of their temporary designations, thinking themselves to be the lords of all they survey. Kim badram kim abhadram va dvaitasya vastuna kiyat vachoditam taranritam manasadhyatameva cha. That which the conditioned souls express by their words or meditate upon by their mind is not the ultimate truth. Considering this, what is actually good or bad within this what is actually good or bad within this illusory world of duality? Sārārtha-darśinī. In these verses, the Lord elaborately describes how it is foolish to glorify or criticize material conditions, because anything seen as not related to the Supreme Lord is an illusion. The holy names, forms, abodes, and devotees of the Supreme Lord are all transcendental, and thus as good as Him. All dualities of this world, whether spoken by material words or meditated upon by the material mind, are illusory. The word asat means that which has no factual existence. So praise and criticism of the objects that are seen to be separate from the Supreme Lord is itself an activity of illusion. On the other hand, anything seen in relation to the Supreme Lord is to be considered transcendental. The Supreme Lord is eternal, full of knowledge, unlimited, and full of bliss. He is the reservoir of all transcendental pleasure. He has many transcendental names, such as Gopala, and these names are fully spiritual. Those who glorify the Supreme Lord are on the path to liberation. Even before the devotee relinquishes his material body, he is awarded a spiritual body by the mercy of the Lord. The abode of the Lord is transcendental, and his associates are also transcendental. Anything that is not in relation to the Lord is mundane, illusory, and fit to be rejected. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. The absolute truth is reflected in the objects manifested by material nature. However, one should know that a mere shadow or reflection of the absolute truth, as found in material objects, cannot bring about genuine auspiciousness. Sometimes the mind accepts something as favorable, and sometimes it accepts the same thing as unfavorable. Perverted existence cannot be accepted as ultimate reality, although it may appear similar. All actions performed in the perverted reflection of material existence, such as speaking and meditating, are self-centered in nature, being nourished by the false ego. Those who are absorbed in thought of temporary material objects, and those who take pleasure in discussing the temporary manifestations of matter, are averse to the service of the absolute personality of Godhead, although they pose as being very expert in discriminating between that which is seemingly good and that which is apparently bad. When the eternal constitutional activities of the spirit soul are thus dormant, the mind assumes the role as the master. The mind's false ego considers itself as the enjoyer and thus becomes subjected to happiness and distress while interacting with the sense objects of form, taste, smell, touch, and sound with the help of the senses. When such sense enjoyers experience frustration, they imagine themselves as renouncing sense gratification while remaining engaged in propagating the philosophy of impersonalism. While such people remain deviated from the path of devotional service because of their materialistic mentality, they attribute mundane abomination to the Supreme Absolute Truth, having no understanding of the spiritual energies, Ladini, Sandhini, and Samvit. Being impersonalists, they consider the temporary material manifestation as false, and the eternal kingdom of God as a similar mundane existence. Those who are conversant with the truth know that it is unreasonable to equate this temporary cosmic manifestation with the eternal abode of the Lord. Chaya pratyavaya bhasa yasanto pyartakarina evam dehadayo bhava yachantya mrityuto bhayam. Although shadows, echoes, and the acceptance of a seashell, seashell as silver are only illusory reflections of real things, such reflections do cause meaningful perception. In the same way, although the identification of the conditioned soul with his material body and mind is illusory, this identification creates fear within him. This identification creates fear within him, right up to the time of death. Sārārtha-darśinī. If temporary material objects are not reality, then how can pots and pitchers be of use? The answer is that just as a shadow, echo, reflection, or the acceptance of a seashell as silver produces an emotional response, although illusory, so material objects, although temporary and illusory, are still considered as useful by the conditioned soul. Although the material body is temporary and illusory, it creates fear of material existence for the living entities up until the time of death. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. A reflection, shadow, and echo, and the mistake of accepting a seashell as silver are illusory existences. Although they resemble the objects they imitate, they are distinct from them. The living entity's conditional state is a temporary and illusory manifestation of reality. Non-devotees, being bereft of the service of the Lord's lotus feet, which award fearlessness, experience fear, illusion, lamentation, and so forth in relation to illusory material manifestations. Forgetfulness of one's constitutional position makes one identify with his gross and subtle bodies, which are temporary and thus subject to annihilation, causing great fear and anxiety. Atmaeva tadidam vishvam srijate prabhu drayate trati vishvatma hriyate haratishvara tasmana yatmano nyasmad anyo bhavo nirupite yang trividha nirmula bhatiratmani idam guna mayam vidhi trividam mayaya kritam. The Supersoul is the supreme controller and creator of this world, and thus he is also that which is created. Thus, the soul of all existence maintains and is also maintained. He withdraws and is also withdrawn. No entity should be ascertained as being separate from him, the Supersoul, who nonetheless remains distinct from everything. When the truth has been ascertained in this manner, it should be understood that the three conditions of material existence, adhyatmika, adidaivika, and adibhotika, are illusory, being manifestations of Maya. Sārārtha-darśinī. The Vedas have ascertained that the material creation is a manifestation of the separated energy of the Supreme Lord. How then can it be considered false? The answer is given here. The Supreme Lord is both the cause and effect. Therefore, the material manifestation is not separate from him. He maintains the entire universe in his form as Paramatma. Nothing seen as without relationship with the Supersoul can be accepted as reality. The three features of material existence, adhyatmika, adidaivika, and adibhotika, are thus manifestations of illusion. If the Supersoul is the actual form of the universe, then from where did these three features come? The answer is herein given. If there is no original, then how can there be an imitation? The cosmic manifestation is a creation of the inconceivable energy of the Lord. This is the doctrine of the followers of Parinamavad, and the followers of Vivartavad say that these three features are illusions born of ignorance. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. The material world has emanated from the energy of the Supreme Lord. It is maintained by him for some time, and then it again merges within him. The temporary cosmic manifestation is meant for the inhabitation of those who are averse to the Lord of the Supreme. The temporary cosmic manifestation is meant for the inhabitation of those who are averse to the service of the Supreme Lord. The Lord divides the time factor and empowers the material energy which possesses the power to cover the consciousness of the living entities and to throw them into the darkest regions of nescience. The external energy which manifests the material world has no existence separate from the Supreme Lord, whose nature is eternal, full of knowledge, and full of bliss. He is very dear to his devotees. The objects of the senses have been created for the enjoyment of those who have turned their backs on the Supreme Lord. The great variety of conditions that have manifested within material existence are designed to capture the conditioned souls, whose only engagement is the gratification of their senses. The abominable conditions of birth, death, old age, and disease are absent in the eternal abode of the Lord, Vaikuntha, or Goloka. Thus, there is a gulf of difference between the manifestations of the internal and external potencies. All the objects of the material world are products of the three modes of material nature, which are manifested from the external energy of the Lord. Just as an echo is similar to the original sound it mirrors, the activities of the material world bear some resemblance to those enacted in the eternal abode of the Lord. Materialistic people generally consider the form of the Lord to be a manifestation of the modes of material nature, and such a conception is a product of the darkness of nescience. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is pure, transcendental existence, devoid of all kinds of abomination that is experienced in this world. The Lord is unlimited and absolute. Etad vedvan maduditam jnana-vijnana-naipunam na nindati nachastoti loke charati suryavat. One who has become firmly fixed in the understanding that I have imparted and its practical application will not be concerned with honor or dishonor. Like the sun, he wanders unimpeded throughout the world. Sārārtha-darśinī. Oh, Haribol. Hare Krishna Paramahansa Maharaj Dandavat Pranam, Kishore Prabhu, and Bhavatarani and Nrihari Prabhu. Hare Krishna Dandavats. Okay, so Sārārtha-darśinī. After realizing this knowledge and its application as instructed by the Supreme Lord, learned devotees treat everyone equally, like the sun, which distributes its heat and light to all without discrimination. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. The living entities are eternally parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, and thus they are by nature full of knowledge. However, involvement in mundane activities, which naturally involves praising and criticizing others, covers one's pure and original consciousness. Just as a devotee should not be attached to anything material, so he should also not be hateful of anything. He should simply accept everything favorable for the service of the Lord and reject everything that is unfavorable, as directed by the spiritual master. Pratyakshena anumanena nigamena samvida adyantavad asajgyatva nisango vicharediha. By means of sensual perception, reason, and logic, the evidence of the scriptures, and one's own understanding, one should know that this world has a beginning and an end, and thus has no ultimate reality. Keeping this always in mind, one should live in this world without attachment. Sārārtha-darśinī. Anything that has a beginning also has an end. Through direct perception, one can see the beginning and end of material objects, such as clay cooking pots. Through deduction, one can conclude that there is a beginning and an end to this visible world. From the Vedic statements, one can hear about the beginning and end of the material elements, such as the sky, and by means of one's personal realization, one can understand that the cosmic manifestation is temporarily manifested by the Lord as a concession for the conditioned souls who desire material enjoyment. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. A self-realized soul can understand through direct perception, deduction, and the evidence of the transcendental sound vibration that this material world is always changing and has a beginning and an end. A realized soul could never accept this world as eternally existent and unchanging, knowing it to be a transformation of the absolute truth. Transformable nature is distinct from eternal nature. The Vedas inform us that the cosmic manifestation is a transformation of the Lord's illusory energy and therefore temporary. Only those who have cultivated spiritual knowledge, which is the fruit of their practice of yoga and meditation, can live in this world without attachment, having realized its temporary nature by means of direct perception, deduction, and scriptural evidence. The word nisanga, however, does not indicate that such a person gives up the association of devotees and the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Shri Uddhava-uvacha Naivatmano na dehasya sangsritir drashyayo anatma swadrishorisha kasyasyar upalabhyate. Shri Uddhava said, "My dear Lord, it cannot be that this material existence is the experience of either the soul, who is the seer, or the body, which is seen. On the one hand, the spirit soul is innately endowed with perfect knowledge, and on the other hand, the material body is not a conscious entity. To whom, then, does this experience of material existence pertain?" Sārārtha-darśinī. Shri Uddhava said, "The living entity is a pure spirit soul full of knowledge and bliss, whereas the material body is a machine without consciousness. Who or what is actually experiencing the ignorance of material existence? The conscious experience of material life cannot be denied, and thus Uddhava asked Lord Krishna this question to elicit a more precise understanding of the process by which illusion occurs. Although this material creation is temporary, as long as it exists, who is it that experiences happiness and distress? The material body is a product of matter, and therefore inert by nature. The material body is a product of matter and therefore inert by nature, so that it cannot feel material happiness and distress. The spirit soul is by nature full of knowledge. Therefore, how could he lose such constitutional knowledge? How has the spirit soul been placed into illusion?" Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Inert matter cannot see, and the soul, being fully spiritual, has nothing to do with matter. How then can these two have a relationship as the seer and the seen? Atma vyayo guna shuddha swayam jyotir anavrita agnivad daruvadachir deha kasyeha sangsriti. The spirit soul is transcendental, eternal, pure, self-illuminating, and unaffected by material conditions. It is like fire, whereas the material body is dead matter, like firewood. So in this world, who is it that actually experiences material enjoyment? Sorry, did I say enjoyment? I meant to say existence. So who is it that actually experiences material existence? So I think I need to stand up now. 1 second. Sārārtha-darśinī. The spirit soul is imperishable, transcendental, pure, self-illuminating, full of knowledge, and unaffected by material conditions, being the superior energy of the Supreme Lord. In this verse, the example of wood and fire is given. Fire is self-illuminating, and wood is illuminating only what it is associated with fire. The material body is dead matter, like wood, and the spirit soul is self-illuminating, like fire. Fire exists independently of wood, and wood cannot itself illuminate. The soul exists beyond matter, and matter itself is devoid of consciousness. So, who or what actually experiences the happiness and distress of material existence? Hare Krishna Shasharmaji. Okay, so who, let's just see the question again. The spirit soul is transcendental, eternal, pure, self-illuminating, and unaffected by material conditions. It is like fire, whereas the material body is dead matter, like firewood. So in this world, who is it that actually experiences material existence? Okay, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Yava Dehindriya Pranar, Atmana Sanikarshanam, Sangsara Phalavangstavar, Apartopya Vivekina. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, as long as the ignorant spirit soul maintains his relationship with the material body, senses, and life air, his illusory material existence will continue to flourish, although it is actually meaningless. Sārārtha-darśinī. Ignorance is the cause of the living entity's bondage to material existence. This is being explained in this and the following verses. One's material existence continues to flourish as long as the soul maintains his relationship with its temporary material products. How does a living entity establish a relationship with a temporary material body? It is simply due to ignorance. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. As long as the spirit soul remains attracted to his material body, senses, and life air, the material world appears to be a very fruitful place, even though it is actually insignificant. The cultivation of knowledge that is based upon ignorance is not factual. Because such knowledge is based on the bodily concept of life, it is faulty and therefore useless. Arte hyavidyamanepi sangsritirna nivartate dhyayato vishayan asya swapne nartagamo yata. The living entity is transcendental to material existence, but because of his mentality of lording it over material nature, his material existence continues, so that, just as in a dream, he is affected by all sorts of inconveniences. Sārārtha-darśinī. If the material body is an illusory manifestation of the external energy of the Lord, then how did the pure spirit soul become attached to it? Even though the objects of this material world are not factual, they continue to affect the conditioned souls. Such a condition is just like a dream, wherein the dreaming person sees many things that actually have no real existence, and yet because of them, he suffers. When one becomes frightened by seeing a snake or tiger in a dream, such a feeling is certainly based on illusion. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. As a sleeping person accepts the objects seen in dreams as reality, so until one attains the stage of self-realization, his propensity for material enjoyment will continue. Yata hya pratibuddhasya prasvapo bhavanarthabhrit sa eva pratibuddhasya na vaimohaya kalpate. While dreaming, a person may experience many undesirable things, but upon awakening, he is no longer troubled by such dreams, even though he may remember them. Sārārtha-darśinī. A dream produces varieties of undesirable circumstances, but after awakening, one ceases to be troubled by them because of understanding the dream's illusory nature. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. A dreaming person takes his experiences to be factual, although they are illusory. After waking up, however, one is no longer affected by whatever he might have experienced in his dreams. In the same way, a self-realized soul can understand that this visible world is illusory and therefore insignificant. When one understands the nature of reality, the temporary and illusory experiences of material existence seem insubstantial. Shoka harsha bhaya krodha lobha moha sprihadaya ahankarasya drishyante janma mrityushcha natmana. Lamentation, jubilation, fear, anger, greed, delusion, and hankering, and so on, all these are experiences of the false ego and not of the pure soul. Sārārtha-darśinī. Feelings such as lamentation and fear are not experiences of the soul. Such feelings are due to the false ego, which is the pure soul's illusory identification with the subtle material mind and the gross material body. A self-realized person knows that whatever emotions are experienced on the material platform have no relation to the pure soul, whose eternal mood is engagement in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. As a result of his illusory identification with the gross body and subtle mind, the conditioned soul feels lamentation for things lost, jubilation over things gained, fear of impending danger, anger at the frustration of his desires, and greed for sense gratification. Being bewildered by such false attractions and aversions, the conditioned soul must accept further material bodies, thus forcing him to undergo repeated births and deaths. However, a self-realized soul considers all such experiences as illusory. Dehindriya pranamano bhimano jivontaratma gunakarma murti sutra mahanityuradeva-gīta saṅsara adhavatikala tantra. The conditioned soul is awarded a form according to his situation under the modes of nature and his work, and due to ignorance, he identifies with his body and mind. In this way, he receives material designations under the strict control of supreme time, and is thus forced to travel within this material world. Sārārtha-darśinī. One might question, if lamentation, hankering, happiness, and distress, and so on, are the nature of the false ego and not of the spirit soul, why does the spirit soul accept such a nature and suffer? Why would anyone accept another's nature and bring about his own suffering? In this verse, the answer is given. The living entity never acts independently. The conditioned souls have been enticed by the false ego to become enjoyers of this material world. After accepting the false ego, the living entity runs after material sense gratification, being influenced by the three modes of material nature, under the control of time, which represents the Supreme Lord. They run after material sense gratification under the control of time, which represents the Supreme Lord. It is for this reason that the living entity suffers. It is for this reason that the living entity suffers by false identification, and thus accepts material bodies repeatedly in the cycle of birth and death. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. There are two classes of living entities: those that are eternally conditioned, and those that are eternally liberated, Nitya-baddha and Nitya-mukta. The eternally liberated associates of the Lord reside in his spiritual abode Vaikuntha, which is a manifestation of the spiritual potency. There, the liberated souls are eternally engaged in the blissful service of the Supreme Lord, being situated in their original transcendental forms. Being part and parcel of Krishna, they naturally remain as if members of his family. The eternally conditioned souls wander about within the material world, which is under the control of time. posing themselves as sense enjoyers, they accept the material body and mind so that they can interact with the objects of the senses. And all these are transformations of the Mahat Tattva. Amulametar bahurupa rupitam manovacha prana sharira karma jnana sinopasanaya shitena chitva munirgam vicharatya trishnaha. Although the false ego has no factual basis in reality, it is perceived by the conditioned soul in many forms. Right? Although the false ego has no factual basis in reality, it is perceived by the conditioned soul in many forms. The false ego is perceived as the functions of the mind, speech, life, air, and bodily faculties. With the sharpened sword of transcendental knowledge received from the bona fide spiritual master, one who is sober should cut off this false identification and live within this world free from material attachment. Sārārtha-darśinī. How is it possible to give up the false egoistic conception of life, which is actually illusory? The false ego manifests in many forms, such as the activities of the mind, speech, life, air, and senses. One must cut off one's attachment to the false ego with the sharpened weapon of knowledge, which is received from the spiritual master by engagement in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. In this way, one can live within this world without attachment. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Sober devotees who are not intoxicated by desires for material enjoyment live within this world as mendicants by cutting off the illusory false ego and its products, the body, mind, speech, and life air. The conditioned souls who are averse to the service of Lord Hari misuse their valuable human form of life to become either whimsical sense enjoyers or dry renouncers. The heart of the conditioned soul thus becomes covered by the dust of sense gratification, or filled with the broom of renunciation. On the strength of the association of saintly persons, and by their transcendental instructions, one can gradually be relieved of both kinds of mundane abomination, thus losing all interest in mundane sense gratification and impersonal liberation. Okay, last verse for today. Jnānam viveko nigamas tapascha pratyakshamati hyam. Actually, maybe we should stop here. Yeah, let's stop here because also Raseshwari Mataji has to go for our next class. So we'll continue on from 18 tomorrow. What's the translation? Real spiritual knowledge is based on a discrimination between spirit and matter, and it is cultivated by scriptural evidence, austerity, direct perception, and logical inference. The Supreme Lord exists alone before the material creation and after its annihilation. He is the cause of all causes, and it is He who assumes the form of time. Even in the middle period of universal maintenance, the Supreme Lord alone is the only reality. So we'll read that from there on tomorrow. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaur Hari Bol. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Jai Shishi Guru Garanga Gandhar Vikagiri Dhari Shishi Radha Vinod Bihari Ju Ki Jai Shri Govana Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju Ki Jai Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimar Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Gosvāmī Maharaj Śrīla Gurudev Ki Jai Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimar Bhakti Vedanta Vaman Gosvāmī Maharaj Ki Jai Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimar Śrīla Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Śrīla Prabhupāda Ki Jai Nityalila Pravishta Maha Bhagavat Śrīla Gaurkishora Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Nityala Pravishta Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Ṭhākura Ki Jai. Nityala Pravishta Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Rupa Gauḍīya Guru Varga Ki Jai. Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath. Shri Jiva Gopala Bhattadass Raghunath Sharda Gosvāmī Prabhu Ki Jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Raya Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda Ki Jai. Namachay Srila Haridas Ṭhākura Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Kora Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Radha Kunda Shama Kund Ki Jai. Shri Yamuna Devi Ganga Devi Ki Jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Shri Purnamasi Yoga Maya Ki Jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Shri Uddhava-gīta Ch, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Sārārtha-darśinī Vritti Ki Jai, Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Gosvāmī Prabhupāda Gauḍīya Bhāṣya Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavashacha Krishna Bhakti Pradadevi Satyavatai Namo Namaha. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Dandavat pranam to everybody. I'll see you all tomorrow, where we only have, I think, like 3 or 4 more days of Uddhava-gīta left, and then we've finished the whole book. And then I think there are just a few chapters, very short chapters of, and then left in the 11th canto, and then we'll continue on to the 12th canto, which is very short. So hopefully we'll be able to finish everything before Chaturmasi begins, so that we can start our Chaitanya Bhagavat, daily Chaitanya Bhagavat program. All right, Hari Bol, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Jai Shri Radhe. Oh, and do you want to see the calendar? Let's see what the countdowns. In 3 days from now is Baladevi Vijabhushan's disappearance day. The day after that is Ganga Mata Goswami's appearance day and Ganga Dashahara. Then in 5 days from now is Pandava Nirjala Ekadashi. Then soon after that, 7 days from now, 1 week from now, is the Dahi Chira Mahotsav, the Panihati festival. And then 9 days from now is Snan Yatra of Lord Jagannath, it's Purnima, and also the disappearance day of Sridhar Pandit. Then in 10 days from now is the disappearance day of Shyamananda Prabhu. And Chaturmasya begins in 1 month, 7 days from now. And Purushottam Vrat in 1 month, 22 days from now. All right, everybody. Hare Krishna. See you all tomorrow. Jai Shri Radhe.